He had asked staff to come up with a set of zoning conditions to recommend to applicants who propose to rezone and amend the 2045 land use map within existing rural density residential and rural transition residential areas. You've seen a few of these come through, and it's kind of just been, one-offs. And so they had asked us to come up with a list so that they could take a look at those, and we would be able to give those to the developers when they came into those areas. The next thing that happened was the Western Big Branch Area Plan, which encompassing portions of Friendship and New Hill communities. We had some workshops in March, and the public expressed interest in having more guidelines and restrictions for development in or near rural areas. And the third thing that happened was Wake County is seeking a memorandum of understanding to allow voluntary agricultural districts and enhanced voluntary agricultural districts in the town's ETJ and corporate limits. The Wake County staff approached our staff and asked for wider buffers adjacent to properties designated as VAD or EVAD.
I had a couple of questions about the background. One was, can you remind us the rural density and the rural transition, what those are again?
So the rural density residential allows rezoning to the residential agricultural district, which is 1 unit per 5 acres. Okay. The rural transition residential area allows rezoning to rural residential, which is 1 unit per acre.
Okay. Have we gotten any rural density residential rezoning requests recently?
No, all of the RA district, but this is what they are currently on. So they would be proposing to go from rural density to rural transition, or rural transition to low density.
Okay. Oh, who existing? Sorry. Okay, existing.
Yeah, this is existing. It's not. Sorry. It's not the it's the request from, not the request to. So from rural density to rural transition, or rural transition to low density.
Okay.
Or PUD with similar densities.
Okay. And does Wake County staff differentiate in terms of like this kind of request, the VAD versus EVAD?
No, they consider them the same for the buffer request that they made to us.
Okay. One major thing, though, my understanding is it's 10-year commitment for the E1.
It is.
Versus a 10-year, but they can write to get out of it for the regular. Okay.
They, property owner can drop that.
The B1,
the B,
not the E.
not the E.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So given these various related initiatives and requests, planning staff recommends utilizing the conditional zoning process to accomplish the goals that we had heard. We like the conditional zoning process because we have more information at that time. Looking at particular properties, we can work directly with the developers. It's a little bit more of a fluid process in order for us to tailor it to the exact conditions of the property. So for example, I forget the name of the project. It was up there off Lake Castleberry, but it was called something else.
Castleberry Reserve.
Castleberry Reserve, where they were adjacent to the game lands, and we looked at it, and we figured out it might not be the 450 everywhere. There was a little bit of a. So anyway, we like zoning conditions because if there's a rule in the UDO, we can't vary it. It's just a flat rule, and so some projects would either be not able to go forward or would have to go forward as something different. And so so this is our first step in preparing these zoning conditions that would provide guidance to developers who are seeking these rezonings. And so we're not asking for any decisions today. We just want you all to listen and think about it, and we can come back at another time. And we haven't talked with the development community. We have shared this with the Western Big Branch Area Plan neighbors, and they did provide a few comments, but this will be a continuing process. There'll be other iterations going forward. So the planning committee had a few things that they had specifically asked for. One was to limit mass grading, and we did have a presentation that was given about a year ago. We had our staff from Water Resources there. Prohibiting mass grading and stage grading is a bit more difficult than just saying don't do it. So the restrictions often result in not as efficient managing of stormwater. It causes steep driveways, and it doesn't prevent individual owners from moving trees on their properties. So staff does have a recommendation that we look at wider perimeter and street front buffers. as well as increasing the minimum RCA to 40%, which that number was the original number in the UDO
Prior to a stormwater,
prior to stormwater.
that
Yes,
was to soak the water up, my understanding, in part.
partly. And then when the stormwater came in, at first you could plant the stormwater ponds, and so it still counted as RCA. Eventually, the state said, no, you just have to put grass around the stormwater ponds. So then we stopped counting most of it as RCA. So there's been a few iterations with that, but yeah.
We have a geographic, sorry, Bob. We have a geographic RCA thing in our UDO based on certain roads. Was that considered a road that's further to the west of 540 being or a series of roads being the boundary?
No, it's the rural density and rural transition land use classifications. It's not a road, it's the current classifications.
Right, but they aren't all equal, those properties that would be in that category. Some are much closer to town than others, right?
Yes, most of the rural and rural transition properties are in the western edge of our jurisdiction. However, there are some that are closer to town because the neighbors
Asked
and that
for it.
asked for that low density, such as the subdivision north of 64.
Castlewood.
Castlewood and Buckingham are
Yeah.
the two that are in town.
I remember.
Recommendation, then, we would make our RCA rules even more complicated. Another caveat that says, if you're in this geographic area, it's this, just for you, it's this.
No, because we're not talking about UDO
Talk
amendments.
about zoning.
We're talking about
conditions.
zoning
Yeah,
conditions.
Oh, I
okay.
see.
That's what we're trying to make it less complicated.
So you suggest to applicants, hey, you're in this area, or you're of this density, we suggest you add a condition to make your RCA work.
Exactly.
But the complex, I kind of like that being the rules though too, because everybody has to do it. There's not a lot of wiggle room.
Good luck.
No, I'm right. I'm just saying, it was a discussion about value of land, like you could do anything with it, land.
But so this is just from rezoning from rural residential or rural transition? Because how much land is really zoned that way? Because most of those properties on the western side are Wake County, was it the WAD or whatever. And so would this apply to those properties?
Yes, because this is land use, not zoning.
So when they would request to come into our jurisdiction, which usually they're only going to do if they need
Right.
water or sewer services, then that's when they would apply.
So the effective change here, because most of the land that's rural residential is in the park, which currently is 30, and there's the 5% mass grading penalty. This may be effectively a 5% increase if they were to be in condition. Is that right?
That sounds right. Yep.
But the 5% it would be a zoning condition, so there would be like the mass grade thing. If
No,
it's,
it would just be a
It would-
flat
case by
40%.
It would be a net 5%, because under the current UDO, it'd be 35%, and then they would be condition. Would be
All right, so then the second bullet point that the planning committee had talked about was to increase tree preservation. Again, we think that increasing perimeter buffers, increasing buffers along the frontage, and having the 40% RCA would accomplish this goal. And I guess one item that I wanted to point out was the 50-foot street front buffer used to be the requirement in the ordinance. It was dropped down to 30 feet at some point. 30 feet is not very wide, and it's oftentimes eaten up by utilities. So in these areas, we'd recommend that the 50-foot buffer be a zoning condition.
have you thought about how this would work, the zoning conditions, how staff would interact with developers with these kind of recommendations? Would you recommend denial if they didn't do this in front of us?
We would if we thought they didn't do as much as they could. So we look at every project on its merits. So if there's a project that didn't have a lot of depth and we felt like it would make the most sense to have the buffer at the front, then we'd make that recommendation. But if for some reason on the back, let's say it was next to the game lands and we're like, hey, we'd rather have a smaller buffer on the front and have a bigger buffer on the game lands, then that would be the recommendation.
Okay, I was thinking about this, all of it. So
It's kind of like the Environmental Advisory Board, really. It's, here's your whole menu. We would love all of this, but what makes sense for this particular project?
To that point, like, I think that's my concern here. I definitely want a bigger buffer if possible, but there are times when that bigger buffer is more effective on the back of the property, adjacent to an existing preservation, like if,
Mhm.
you know, the parcel behind the development, the RCA is there, we want the additional, maybe give us additional 10 feet, we want it there, right, to make it even bigger habitat area. 30 feet versus 50 feet, you know, it still doesn't really create a habitat for preservation. It's more about visual stuff. I'd rather have the additional preservation back. So I'm fine with as long as what you're saying is there'd be flexibility for, like, if you look at the site, as though it obviously makes more sense here to have an additional buffer in the back, we can do that. Good, then.
In my experience, though, normally you recommend denial when something in the land use or something is not being met, stuff we have written down versus recommendations that they don't want to do. You guys are, I guess you're empowered to make a denial recommendation, even if it's not something in the UDO, like these would be.
We spend months fighting and arguing and twisting arms. So what you all see is much different usually than what first comes.
Yeah, which I love.
And so we would look at it, and in our professional judgment, if, let's say we end up with, I don't know, 80 different things they could pick from, and they came in and they were like, we could do 43. And we looked at all of them, we said, no, you could do this number 44, number 45. We want you to do this. And if they're not willing to do that, we could recommend denial. You often don't see us recommending denial because most of the time they do all the things that we've asked them to do.
Okay.
On occasion they don't, and then we do recommend denial. Okay. The other one that you all have been interested on, the rezonings for the pedestrian connectivity where there are sidewalk gaps or particularly greenway gaps. This is again, I think, up at Castleberry Reserve. There was, I don't know, was it a sidewalk?
Sidewalk,
Yeah.
side path. all
Side
sorts.
path
To 300 feet of sidewalk.
Yeah.
Connected to the bike trail.
to connect to the American Tobacco Trail. And so that was one of the things.
Offsite, that was an offsite.
Offsite, yes, and which you can do with zoning conditions. So these were we think that these should be considered as well. If there's something nearby to connect to, they should consider connecting offsite. All right, so then we heard from the Western Big Branch Area Plan neighbors. They've provided a citizen overlay district proposal. It was included in the agenda packet that Jenna had presented a couple of months ago. And so we wanted to go through each of these. They recommend a lot size of 1 unit per acre. We think we do need to look at a case-by-case basis. It doesn't always make sense to have all the lots be an acre, but we do think that the goal would be to be a ½ acre to 1 acre for the RRCZ zoning district. They wanted frontage minimums, and so we looked at it, and we think the minimum lot width in RRCZ should be generally around 100 feet and generally around 80 feet in the LDCZ district. That doesn't mean that something wouldn't come in with 95 feet or 110 feet. It's just that's generally what we'd be looking at. They were interested in the building setbacks being larger. We do support the typical building setbacks in LD and RR, but we may support larger than typical depending on the context. And it really, again, is about how you get the roads in there, how deep the lots can be, what the product is that they're building. It would be a case by case, but we understand what the neighbors are looking for. They're looking for a more rural look and not having the houses lined all up.
How are you thinking about the things you mentioned previously in the context of other areas, not as maybe potentially developable as the Big Branch, like down the Barker or whatever road and other places that are closer to Jordan Lake, but still in Wake County? And how are you seeing all these things in that context? Are you thinking about both places kind of?
Yeah, I mean, we looked at the JBI project on Transit Trail. We looked at the Castleberry Reserve. We looked at a couple other properties that haven't come in yet that we've seen and thought about how it would work in this context. And that's why we think there has to be flexibility. Like we can have goals and targets, but every project's different. I mean, it just is. So, I think these all can work in any of the areas that are rural density currently.
Okay, and we're talking about townwide, those zoning districts, not just,
Not the zoning, the land use.
sorry, land.
Yeah, the land use.
Okay.
Yep, townwide. So yeah, if Buckingham or Castlewood were to come in as a whole neighborhood, it wouldn't come under this. They would come in and say, hey, can you change our land use to medium density or something else that's more and compatible with what's around it. Okay, so then they also wanted the building height limited to a 1-story rule. So you go up for 1 story from neighboring properties. So if there's 2-story houses, it could go up to 3. If it's 1 story, it would go up to 2. We think there should be transition, and it could be through a larger buffer. It could be on the edges of the development to limit the height. We do this in a lot of infill projects where we try to get them to do only 2 stories next to the single family that's next door before they transition up. But we would support up to 3 stories on an interior of a project if that were something that was desired by the developer. But we certainly understand that transition and would try to get the 1 story or 2 story next to the rural areas.
Would you have a level of detail to know what's the interior, how it's going to look when it's a rezoning, if it's not a PUD?
It would basically be that there's a zoning condition that the first layer of homes can only be how many stories and what the height is.
Okay.
And then interior.
Okay.
What we get. So they were asking for a 50% tree canopy. We're still recommending 40%. That was the original number in the UDO, but certainly up to y'all to pick a percentage that you think's appropriate.
This is not subject to the UDO, right?
It's not. This is a zoning condition. So it might be that you get a project that you're like, absolutely needs to be 50%. We think you can make it work. And there might be another one where you're like, 40% would probably be better wherever that project is. All right, so the next one is they had asked about using net versus gross density. Net density means you take out roads, you take out RCA, you take out all those set aside things that are either public or HOA controlled, and the density is just based on the lots. Our recommendation is to maintain the use of gross density because of the significant infrastructure and other requirements such as greenways, park dedication, stormwater, RCA, private play lawns, etc. It's also very difficult to do the math on net density. We would 100% be relying on the engineers, the private engineers, to do that math. If planners were good at math, we'd be engineers. So most towns use gross density because of the infrastructure and other requirements, but it is an easier math problem.
We've been through this in years past.
Yep, we've talked about it.
Yeah, and one of the conclusions you have to remember is the current values for the density designations, which are low, medium, high, all that stuff. That's set on the assumption of gross density, right? So if you change the net density, then you recalculate those values and nothing really would change.
Yeah. All right, so then they also wanted to require fencing, and we are in favor of that. We recommend fences be required where projects are adjacent to a bona fide farm, VAD or EVAD, or where a shrub layer would not likely survive within a type A buffer. Good fences make good neighbors. So where it makes sense, we're fine with that. I don't know what type of fence. I don't know that necessarily would want to be a privacy fence. It might be, something more rural in nature. And then they asked for greater buffers. And so again, we were talking about the 50 foot along the roadway to decrease the visual impact. And then increase perimeter buffers by 10 feet as well, above what's currently required in the UDO, and the opacity There are several places where it's a type B, depending on what the zoning districts are, and we think it should be a type A in the zoning condition. They also asked for stormwater protections for farm ponds, and I'll go through that additional condition during the environmental zoning conditions. We did receive help from our stormwater folks on that. The next one the citizens asked for was to prohibit clear cutting and mass grading. And again, we think it's problematic to do. We'd really like to require wider buffers and have a higher RCA requirement for that.
So, and I'm noticing specifically on this one, in the subdivision areas where they did it this way, where they didn't have the mass grading and that type of thing, they have a lot more stormwater issues. Those are usually the ones that reach out to us saying, my backyard is flooding, up to the back door, that type of thing. Would be very concerned about.
The mass grading or the lack of stormwater?
The older developments were built without stormwater control.
It's both. It's both. So when you have this house built up on the hill and you don't really have any stormwater guides, so to speak, to control it, you're gonna have places flooding that are below the period. It's just gonna happen. And we see that in these subdivisions that happen.
What I'm hearing is that your house is flooding in the neighborhood.
My house too. I boosted my neighborhood.
Thank you.
All right, so then they asked for the seller disclosure of zoning conditions. We don't have a problem with this. We're just not sure how it'd be enforced. I'm not really sure. I don't think state law requires the zoning conditions to be provided at closing. We couldn't find anything, at least. It would be nice. Maybe that's something to take up with the state legislature. It seems like a kind of common sense thing. Like if you have zoning conditions that you're subject to, you probably should know them. I feel like at my closing, I was handed a copy of the PUD. They gave it to me, so I don't know. Different closing attorney, I guess. But we don't have a problem with that if there's some legal way to do it. They asked for country and rural architecture, and we do think that we can review the existing architectural standards, and we have some suggestions later in the presentation to fit better in the context of the area. They asked for small homes, and we support affordable housing accessory dwelling units, and the UDO does not currently have a minimum house size. And we work with all developers trying to get a diversity of housing. I ask all the time, can you build a house without a garage? All the time. Because that's the first house I bought in Apex. The reason I could afford it, it didn't have a garage. It was in Sugar Land Road. They don't build them like that anymore very often. Sometimes we get townhomes without garages. But it makes the price point a lot lower. So we try, and we can continue to try.
It's a national problem, I think.
All right. So they did have two things that they asked for that we aren't recommending. One is to limit interconnectivity. And as you know, staff has consistently promoted interconnectivity throughout our jurisdiction. So we are not supportive of that. The second one, it's really not my area. Traffic studies. They wanted traffic studies for parks and CAP schools. TAs are done for road capacity and consider both current traffic and projected traffic, but they typically do not look specifically at parks or schools other than to include them in background traffic. I talked to Russell, but I don't really understand it, but it's just not done that way. So I don't know. I know.
Are they asking for a study done for the school? Or are they asking to ensure that the school and parks are included in the background? I think there was a case recently where a school wasn't included because it wasn't yet approved. But generally, if it's an existing school, it would be. Right?
Yeah, it's in the background traffic if it's built, but I think
the challenge is that we know that there's school coming, but the project has not been approved, so it was excluded from the traffic impact study because it wasn't approved yet. And so it was like, okay, where do you draw the line? Right? There's a reasonable expectation that a school might be there or a park might be there, right? Should be included in the background traffic.
Things change though,
I
right?
got the impression there were like engineering rules behind it, so it wasn't included in
There's a
background traffic.
national standard, there's a
Yeah.
book like that big that he's pulled out of standards.
So, yeah, I don't think this is, as much that, you know, you can go around the scale as much as you want, but there are subjective determination of what's not. You know,
Yeah, my understanding is TIAs are art, not science. I mean, it's just a fact. It's a bunch of assumptions and projections, and it's based on all that data that the engineers have collected over the years and over the different parts of the country, but
there is a negotiation between our engineer and our project about what the scope is, right? And that is done, that's a real thing.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if we should be like mandating that negotiation, us not being engineers, right?
well, and at what point, like, one of the things he said is that how far do you go? You're gonna go 3 miles away to look at something? I mean, you might, but probably not. And you'd be including to Holly Springs, you know, all the people in Holly Springs coming up Friendship.
Well, I think Ross explained to me one time, like, the issue is the farther I could go, the more the traffic, like, uses on the road. So at a certain point, the contribution to intersection, between intersections away is gonna be
Nothing.
effectively zero. So the one next to it is gonna be 100%. You know, it splits off every intersection splits off to a certain point.
What you're saying is, I know we don't know about that, but sure.
I'll be real concise. So part of the conversation with DOT around this, and, you know, we offered this up as a part of an apex consideration, but the conversation with DOT is, you know, the pipeline of the schools. And if you're going to be putting a development in an area where the schools are capped, and you know that pipeline of that school it's not going to have capacity, let's say, for 5 years or 10 years, because they have that data. That in those particular scenarios, if you're choosing to put that density there, you know you're going to have the additional trips to the school and around the school. And so we're tackling it from both sides, but that's the whole point, is you end up with much more traffic from the development in an area that the schools are capped with no potential of it being relieved for 5 or 10 years. So that's the context of that.
All right, so then the categories from Wake County, they asked for a buffer adjacent to EVAD and VAD. We had a conversation with them and determined that 50-foot type A, which is the same as American Tobacco Trail buffer, would be what is recommended. I hear that you all might feel differently between EVAD and VAD, and that's fine.
I just wanted the difference.
That's what one
No,
is more permanent.
I do think this is really problematic. We have to just work on this. There's actually 3 levels. There's a VAD, there's an EVAD, and there's an agricultural easement. Agricultural easements are permanent.
Yeah.
I'm cool with that.
Oh, yeah.
VADs, we need to drop them out of. That's not enough of a commitment to me to be worthy of a type A buffer. I think they should make a bigger commitment. EVADs are 10-year commitment. Even with an EVAD, I'm concerned 10 years compared to a legend buffer next to it. Like, could that be longer? Also, to be an established, working, you know, bona fide farm versus the other ones. So I think there's some work that's to be done.
For the agricultural easements, I would just caution you all, we've had issues with the easements and roads, so you gotta be careful when people do that. I can block the
But these
road.
are, like,
So environmental easement, I would think the agriculture easement would work the same way. It was an issue because folks put it on their land when we had a road on our plan, Richardson Road, on our plan.
Yeah.
So it's great and all, but if it's in the wrong spot, it's gonna cause other problems.
But this is a zoning condition, and you would have the map in front of you when you would recommend this or not. Correct? Unless you
Yeah, I
miss it.
mean, we were only talking about the EVAD and VAD, but then we had another one that was related to bona fide farms as well. With the fence.
Yeah. So all that being said, I think this requires a little bit more thinking. I get the spirit and the intent, and I'm supportive of that, right? But, how do we avoid a scenario that you just described, easement or an EVAD, right, where it's blocking something, that, you know, like the buffer will not block development, right? So I think there's differences there that we, need to, I think, get our heads around a little bit more. Personally.
I think you just need to get the commitment of, needs to be proportional to the commitment of property development. Policies.
So I think the memorandum of understanding would be where we could hash out where these things are going, and they would agree not to place them where we have roads planned. So, I mean, that the memorandum of understanding is what they came and presented to you all, and it's really not a planning issue. It's more of an admin and legal issue, I think. But I think it's important for you all to think about doing that and then have the discussions about where our additional buffers in a zoning condition might be appropriate. It sounds like maybe there needs to be another discussion with them. Because I think they felt like they presented to you and maybe you all nodded or something because they felt like, oh, your town council's all on board. And I was like, okay. Only two.
No, they came to the whole
They
council.
came to council.
Oh.
Yeah,
So anyway, we'll have more
I
discussion.
think with that one, I thought I maybe been nodding, but I've been more like, I want our staff to think about that with Wake County staff and make a recommendation and maybe
We weren't even there.
okay.
I don't think we were there that day.
I think you guys weighing in on such a thing would be, and maybe legal too, would be of value if we're gonna do that. Did we do it yet? We didn't do it yet,
We
right?
didn't do anything. No, they caught me during a different unrelated meeting and said, oh, we presented to your council and we think they're interested. And I'm going to send you the MOU, which I passed along to Randy. And basically they said, okay, well, what can you do from the land use side? I said, oh, I'm working on these zoning conditions. We could do a bigger buffer. We have this 50-foot type A along the American Tobacco Trail. Maybe we do something like that. So, but we can certainly leave it off for now. It can always get added later.
I think it's really work on this part.
All right, so then we went back and looked at the earlier rural area rezonings just to see what types of things were included. And one was the game lands buffer. 450 feet is the NC Wildlife Commission's recommended buffer. So staff's recommendation is to provide the 450 or as much as reasonably possible, since requiring the full buffer could render some properties undevelopable.
450 in our UDO.
It's not in the UDO. That was a zoning condition on the other ones that y'all have seen.
It's a recommendation from the Wildlife Commission.
I know we, went back and forth with all past.
Reserve, yeah. So included in these earlier rezonings was an affordable housing proffer, and they're different on each one. Next, the homeowners association covenant shall not restrict construction of accessory dwelling units, which is pretty standard now. Historic structure shall be placed into historic preservation easement with capital area preservation or similar nonprofit. Cemeteries shall be preserved in place. This is important because Wake County allows cemeteries to be moved. We do not allow cemeteries to be moved. We like to see this zoning condition that they provide the dimensions and location of the grave sites as well. And then I'm not going to read all these. These are just some of the uses that have been in those prior zoning conditions. And then Appendix G, which is included in the staff report, as an attachment, has the allowable agricultural business and agritourism uses. And this was a discussion as part of the Western Big Branch area plan. So there's some agritourism type things that were included. Talking about the development shall provide a gross density of 1 unit per acre. That would be for the RRCZ district. Lot size, ½ acre. Of course, goal would be try to get it as close to an acre as possible. And then the maximum built upon area, we're looking at 50%, which is what the RA and our districts have. Maximum height 40 feet. And then the setbacks, they were a little bit modified, but 40 foot, 15 side, 15 corner side, and 25 rear. And these were in the prior zoning cases. And of course, We are going to recommend standard and enhanced architectural conditions, trying to get at those kind of more rural and call it country look. All right, so then on to the environmental zoning conditions. We did get help from our stormwater folks. The first one, I think you'll find to be exactly the way you've seen it in a lot of rezonings, about the peak runoff. The second one is new. This is to implement a stormwater management plan. And I'm gonna let you all say what this is related to. The second bullet point, I think it might be the Jordan Lake rules that have been suspended, or is that one? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, the targets in the current Jordan Lake also being readopted.
Bring it back, buddy, right?
Still a moving target.
Yeah.
And so we would work with the zoning conditions as that's going through to have it mimic that, the Jordan Lake rules. But the nice thing is once you have it as a zoning condition, it's required, even if something changes in between the time it's approved and constructed.
With that one, is it a reporting thing, or do our current controls actually do this kind of stuff by their design now? Oh. Okay, but the link between the year storm and the nutrients is not, it's not a one-to-one thing.
Okay, and the last one was written to address the neighbors' concern about stormwater protections for farm ponds. And I'm gonna let Robert tell you what all this means. Do you need this? Can you see it?
No, I can see it. It's simply recommended the use of what are called cams. They're blocky left. It's an additive that you put on erosion control devices to help.
Like a powder.
Yes.
Spread and like a brick, and then just it binds to it and makes it heavier. All out. The water getting inside the water.
If you have a list of ones that their lab is certified safe. If you do,
And it's to keep the turbidity out of the farm pond so it doesn't turn into a brown mess.
yeah, it's essentially like it takes all those little teeny clay particles and allows them to bind together the larger particles, so then they can actually settle out.
All right, thank you. So the other environmental zoning conditions that were in the prior rezonings are all things you've seen from the EAB. So these were ones that we thought were appropriate in a rural context. I'm not gonna go through all of them. The next slide it has a lot of the solar conditions. We did get comments from the neighbors. They didn't really like any of the solar conditions. So I'm not sure if it just says government overreach on here. So
Presentation.
I don't know.
Like the whole presentation.
So that was one of the comments that we've gotten. And then these are all just, again, standard ones that you see coming out of the EAP. We just included them as ones that we thought were appropriate. And then the last one, the project shall preserve at least 25% of existing tree canopy. That could be in addition to 40% RCA, because RCA, historic home can count toward that, cemetery, different things. So you might still want to have a tree canopy.
Yeah, I mean, so we covered this over the years too. Like, my goal would be to preserve or restore 100% of the existing canopy, possibly by offsite improvements or donations or something. Is the thing that we tried for a little while, but I still want to find a way to move forward. Kind of hold the line there. And there have been ad hoc efforts to give small donations. Tree charities have, actually generated a lot of money, but nothing that's been modified. And still, I think it's important. Not that expensive. Like Trees for Triangle got a massive donation. It could fund a lot of these charities that.
Yeah, I would like to see the 25 close to 40, right? I understand you're saying that, other things can count towards RCA. But I'd like to see these two numbers a little close.
I think tree canopy, like at a certain point, there's not enough room on site, and I understand that. We've had this discussion before. And one thing we've also discussed before on that point is having inventory of offsite locations that tree can be added. The town owned and some DOT owned, or even private property, like we do plant the peak thing every year, and that gets snapped up in like less than an hour. So there's thousands of people on the wait list. Like we use that as potential developer funded tree canopy replacements on. I'm sure if we said, hey, who wants free trees from developers, like you might find people around town where they have their, their areas. So I do think it would be creative here somehow. My desire is to at least hold the line. Holding the line is be either preserved or restored rather than 25%.
What you were talking about is it's like an addition here about restoration, right? So like
Yes,
25% or anywhere between 25 and 40% on site. And then, other offsite restoration efforts to basically make up the difference.
yes, yeah, because the point's made that you can't preserve 100% tree canopy. That makes the property undevelopable. That's problematic for us to say. But we, finding creative ways to replace tree canopy that has to be removed as part of, normal development practice, I think is where we should go. I think that's something that's feasible to do somehow. And I think we've had a couple ones where I think we've done the right thing. It's just being able to either codify that or us specifically asking for it. We haven't really helped line out.
Okay, so I'm hearing that the existing tree canopy on site should be preserved somewhere between 25 and 40%. And that the offsite, that overall it could be offsite, it could either be restoration or offsite preservation for 100%.
Yeah, offsite either restored by the developer or cost to be restored by somebody else. So I'm happy to see when developers choose to fund some of these tree planting charities around town, they actually do really good work.
I think they could offer that. I don't think we can put it on our list. So, but we can, maybe they can get creative if we say that the offsite restoration or, offsite preservation or on-site restoration needs to be 100%. They can figure out that maybe donating to something like Trees of the Triangle might be a more expedient option for them than doing it on their own.
And how do we look at properties that's in this area? And some of them are agricultural, they're cleared for farmland. Like, how do you look at a property that's been predominantly cleared and farmed for years as far as tree canopy preservation?
There's no reason to be preserved.
So you're just talking about an existing at the time that it comes in for development.
Yes.
But
But they would have to plant up to the RCA, right?
There are minimum standards for RCA. So if it's clear, if there's no vegetation there, then it would have to be planted.
So
Yes.
if it's completely clear for farming, it's only to be developed, they have to plant up 40 or 35%, wherever the RCA.
I've always been nervous about this because you're incentivizing people to clear cut their land.
Is already a penalty.
There's a year they have to wait, right, or something.
Yes, 3 to 5 years, that's state law. And if it's for single family, like if there's a house on it, there's no restriction on the timing. They could clear their whole property.
So we have a lot of properties that have, I forget what it's called, it's the use code for tree farm
Forestry.
and forestry, and so they can cut all of them down. There's not, I mean, they already
It has
have,
to be by forestry plans to not meet that 3 to
Yeah.
5 year, without submitting a, tree removal plan to the town. You have to follow the forestry rules. But have a plan.
And this is only for undeveloped land you're talking about, not if there's a house on it, single family, they can just cut it down.
But I mean, like, people have certain rights regarding tree removal that's codified in state law, which. Right, like, there's nothing, we've learned this before, like, if you're a single family lot, you can't regulate tree removal.
But you're gonna incentivize them potentially to cut it all down, right? I would. To avoid this. If I'm greedy. So whenever, yeah, you could, if you,
Do we consider the penalty, that we were allowed to have a waiting penalty?
not for single family though, you said, right?
Tree forest?
Like, what do you stand to gain from clearing a single family?
A less encumbered piece of property. I don't want to incentivize bad behavior here.
You would
Right.
clear everything except what would be required for the RCA for your subdivision. You would not want to clear that because you have to replant it.
In practice, could they want to do that though? Like, so if it's a single family, if it's a property owner that owns a lot of property.
Mhm.
And they're under contract with someone who's going to rezone.
Mhm.
What happens? Like, they say, hey, you need to cut down 35% of your trees, but it's under contract, like the developer's not gonna fund that, right? Like, until they get their entitlements. And the contract closes, they're not gonna. It seems like gonna be cumbersome in practice for that happen unless they. What was the motivation for them to do it themselves? Like, it would save the developer a little bit of money, like. The amount we charged for tree planting, the canopy restoration wasn't super, like, it was, a small fraction of what our parks and rec fees are.
So I guess if we make it 40 instead of 25, and they're required to do RCA for 30. So they'll cut more, so they don't have to do this. Potentially.
Not a single family.
Well, most of it is, right? Not, There's probably a house on most of these things.
Yeah. Whatever. Single family.
it's a home on like 10 acres, right? You see that all the time. People are gonna know our rules, and I think they're gonna try to find ways to.
So what the answer is not require tree canopy restoration, people will surrender it.
Well, it's not a requirement, first of all, it's a zoning condition.
Yeah, zoning condition. Totally optional zoning condition. So there's a totally optional zoning condition for tree preservation, you just don't do that because you think people preemptively remove it.
I guess if it's a condition, it's different than in our UDO.
So we do the
too.
conditions, we do the tree canopy conditions as of a few years ago, just so whatever the tree canopy cover is on the Google Maps view of 2010. That's the number you're gonna do. So unless you have a time machine, you can't go back and. move it.
I mean,
Is that
If we
a
have,
feasible condition as well? But that would address that, right?
if we had that information.
So it's.
I would just say, it's not that it wouldn't happen, it very well could happen, but I think once they start talking to the developer doesn't want them to cut the trees down because they don't want you all being upset that the trees are cut down. Because you still have to approve the rezoning. You can look at their property and go, you have no trees left, we're not interested. I mean, you can do that. I mean, back in the day, yes, people would go and cut down every tree that they could and sell the lumber before they would sell to a developer.
Yeah.
That did happen. I haven't seen it much because I think that the developers recognize that they have to have a certain amount to get an approval. And they would rather sell the lumber and make the money when they develop.
How's the RCA interact with the canopy thing?
I think that, well, for this one, I think it was just that there are other things that potentially could be RCA, and RCA might be 40% total, but at least 25% will be trees. So 15% might be a cemetery, it might be a historic home, it might be there's a partial credit for private recreation areas. There's other things. So that's just to make sure you get some trees.
Okay.
You wouldn't want the majority to be RCA that's not trees. You want some number to guarantee the tree canopy. Thank you. We appreciate it. We'll work on it some more and come back.
Thank you so much.
Can you, please share that, MOU?
I
Yeah.
Marty, Randy has it.
Anything else? You're not, these are direct. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
It was something 50. I looked up and it was a quarter after. Could have been something. It must have been.